Next up, a guest I always like to have on because, I like to think that one of the things we try to do here generally and in the Money Media is educate people about the sport of horse racing on the flat. When it comes to harness racing, I'm super intrigued by it. I'll bet it, but I don't know much about it. I get a chance to be educated anytime I bring on this next guest. He's Edison Hatter from the First Over podcast. Edison, what's going on?
Thanks for having me on, Pete. Look forward to it. I mean, for everyone, whatever side you fall on, it's definitely a busy time of year here. The Breeders' Crown this weekend, the Breeders' Cup next weekend. And for people like me that truly love both and, breathe and sleep both, it's a really exciting 2 weeks.
Well, that's the place I want to start because we're doing this as a video for our YouTube channel. It's also going to be part of the normal late week podcast. And there's a lot of people I know on the YouTube channel very intrigued by Breeders' Cup. And I'm guessing a lot of them don't really know much about Breeders' Crown. That's probably true of the flat audience in general. What can you tell us in terms of similarities between the Breeders' Cup and the Breeders' Crown?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, Pete, they're very similar. You are looking at a set of championship races to determine the best of the best at the year's end. Now, obviously, in the Breeders' Cup in recent years, there's been a lot more international horses. Obviously, we saw Japan win a couple last year, and we see plenty of European horses in the turf races. Not necessarily the case here. Really, it's North America-based. A lot of our American horses and Canadian horses. There's one race a year, usually Yonkers Raceway, the International Trot. That's kind of our one chance to see horses from Sweden or Australia or other places coming over here and race. But nonetheless, it still is the year-end championships. It really does decide a lot of divisional honors. And ultimately, it's 2 huge days of racing. And very similarly, there's Future Stars Friday. We have all of our 2-year-old championship races on the Friday card. And then the Saturday card is the older championship races. And I guess our Breeders' Crown Classic, if you want to call it that, is really a couple of different races. There's not really a classic division per se. But, of course, people are always intrigued by the what we call the Glamour Boys, of course, the 3-year-old Colt Pacers, essentially the same as our 3-year-olds that go through the Triple Crown Series. Everyone's always intrigued by that division. And then, of course, just the Open Pace, the Open Trot are the best older Open Pacers and Trotters. So definitely some exciting things to look forward to on there. The really difference is maybe that we have eliminations last weekend. We've already held those to determine who would end up on the gate for this next weekend. So in that sense, of course, the winning your ins exists to kind of help the Breeders' Cup get the entries. But for the Breeders' Crown, this is really a chance that the week before we just saw these horses race against one another in eliminations. So that maybe gives you a little bit of an easier time, maybe as a handicapper, getting an idea of how they just performed the week before.
It definitely is something that used to be much more of a thing in flat racing as well. Recency and that ability to say, okay, this is where this horse is in its form cycle now, as opposed to these days where we're sometimes taking looks at horses that haven't run in 3 months, or perhaps in one notable case at the Breeders' Cup, haven't raced in a year. A little bit easier when you have that eliminations the week before. The 2 nights in question now, it will be Friday the 28th and Saturday the 29th. You've got all kinds of special coverage, including a roundtable. And if you're watching this YouTube video the day it goes up, you still have time to make sure you can find the roundtable Edison's doing scheduled right on the In the Money Media channel. What can folks expect from that show, Edison?
Yeah, I mean, it's my usual guest of panelists. It is myself along with Mike Probosi, Ray Catolo. They both work for Nahu Picks. They both have many years of expertise in this industry working on-air personalities. For Mike Probosi, he has his picks from Nahu Picks on the Woodbine Mohawk feed on a nightly basis. Ray Catolo works now as well for the DRF Harness. He writes a column for there. He's like me. He's like 23 or 24, and yet he's worked in this industry like 12 years. So he's got much more experience than me in that sense, even if we are the same age.
Child labor.
Derek Givner will be with us. He is the editor of the DRF Harness. I know you know him as well. So fantastic guy, great source of knowledge on facts and stuff like that for these events, and great handicapper. And likewise, Garnett Barnsdale, who works with DRF Harness as well. Fantastic source of information there. And Robert Reed Jr., who writes the Horse Players Journal in the Woodbine Mohawk program each and every night. So it's a fantastic source of knowledge that we have there to, pool at our disposal to discuss these races and give everyone some of our thoughts, handicapping advice, and wagering strategies. And I think if anyone is in the area up there in Woodbine and is curious to check it out in person, I think besides Ray and I, everyone else will be up there in person on track this weekend. Of course, they're happy to, meet anyone that should be listening and want to chat with them even more about the races while they're up there and hang out a bit. So
that's an all-star team, and we're very excited to be working with you on that. Another similarity with Breeders' Cup and Breeders' Crown is the venue and the way that works. Of course, this year at Woodbine Mohawk, but this is an event that moves around, right?
Yeah, so you know what? I'd almost say it's exactly like the Breeders' Cup in the sense that, let's see, in the Breeders' Cup in the past, what we've done Monmouth and Lone Star Park, and now it seems like we're pretty well set on Keeneland, Santa Anita, Del Mar. That's pretty much the circuit, right? I guess Churchill Downs as well.
Churchill being the fourth. That's what it's been the last several years.
Pretty much it. Kind of the same thing in the Breeders' Crown. We used to have at a point where, in fact, all of the races weren't even held on the same day. It used to be that a lot of these different races, so there's 12 divisions for us. So what's a 14 for the Breeders' Cup, 14 championship races. It's 12 for the Breeders' Crown. Used to be the one race would be held at this track and another at this track, and that was back when it started in the early 80s, and I think they even both started around the same time. It was 1984, I believe, for the Breeders' Crown, and I believe the Breeders' Cup was right then as well, right? Maybe 83. So they both started around the same time as well, and but lately, the three that we've had in rotation are, ironically, Pete, really three of the tracks that we've worked with a lot here on the money. It's Hoosier Park out in Indiana, it's Woodbine Mohawk up in Canada, and it's the Meadowlands in New Jersey. And those are really the three that they've settled in the last couple years. And ultimately, I think that's the rotation they'll keep with. I really think they are the three best venues to host an event like this.
One of the storylines on the standardbred side that's really captured my imagination this year, the saga of Bulldog Hanover, hit a little bit of a bump in the road last time. Will he be competing at the Breeders' Crown?
He will be. And, it's interesting. So he is a horse who, in that most recent race, and, you can go listen to our Roundtable Martyr, there'll probably still be more debate over this. There's two lines of thoughts here. The question is, did he throw in a clunker and he lost the race last time out in Kentucky? Or, did he still race really well? I'm of the opinion he still raced really well. It's one of those things that, he's won so much this year, winning another race, simply winning it, especially a race like that, is a nice little stake, but it's not the Breeders' Crown, it's not a championship race. I think they went out with the intention on that really fast track to go for the record. And those fractions that he set early on showed that. So I think they were determined to just empty the tank. Can we break this record, regardless of what happens behind us down the stretch? And I think that's what they did. He got out-sprinted later by a very good horse who was last year's, champion older pacer. I mean, he's a fantastic horse as well. The horse that he lost to, Bulldog Hanover, they'll match up again here at the Breeders' Crown, and they'll match up again in a month at the Meadowlands in the TVG Finals, which is the final Grand Circuit event of the year. And what's interesting about Allywag, I guess to give you a very short 30-second background, is that there were some issues with stakes payments for him this year. So he did not end up in a lot of the big stakes throughout the summer because his payments weren't up to date and he wasn't eligible to those races. So in theory, we could have had Bulldog and Allywag squaring off all summer. But as a result, Allywag's kind of been stuck finding, other spots for himself to enter in. Bulldog's been in all the big stakes. So now here at the end of the year, we're going to get really three matchups between them. The Alluraj at Kentucky, which Allywag won, this Breeders' Crown final on Saturday, and the TVG Finals next month. So those three worth watching for sure, those three matchups as we go forward.
In the preamble, you talked a little bit about the Glamour Boys division. Give us an overview of what's been happening in that division and how we might see it play out on the track.
Yeah, so I guess for people listening, to give some race numbers and ideas. So Friday, Saturday's cards both will start at 7 p.m. I believe the coverage on Fox Sports 2, by the way, is 9 to 11 p.m. on Friday. And on Saturday, it is 7:30 to 11. Races 6 through 9 are the 2-year-old championships on Friday. Races 2 through 9 are the championships on Saturday. So we discussed the open pace with Bulldog. That will be race 9 Saturday. So that's why I say that I guess could be kind of considered our Breeders' Crown Classic, if you want to pretend that exists. It is the last race, Breeders' Cup Classic, of course, the last, Breeders' Cup race on the card. I believe they're throwing a 12th race on the overnight. I believe I saw on the back end of that huge card of Keeneland. But open pace, race 9. And then for us, we still have 3 more after that. So we'll have 12 races total on that card. But we were discussing next the 3-year-old Colt Pacers. That will go as race number 7. And that's an intriguing division for sure. Beach Class won the Meadowlands Pace and was a fantastic story to follow this summer, was racing really well, but he had a little bit of injury issue. They weren't sure whether he'd be ready in time for the Breeders' Crown. The answer was no, so he ends up out of here. And that leaves us with really 2 big ones that are going to be battling here. It's Pebble Beach, who won the North America Cup over this Mohawk surface back in June. It's kind of an okay year since then. He's been putting together some big races, but maybe nothing super spectacular. But he won his elimination very impressively. He's gotten Lasix recently, so maybe that's a plus, and he's looking in pretty good form heading into this final. But the other horse that's taken this division by storm this year is By the Missile, who was very lightly raced going into the Adios out at the Meadows back in late July and was considered a pretty big underdog to Pebble Beach and Beach Class that day. But he beat them, and it's just been on a roll since then. He has won many in a row, and he won pretty nicely in the elimination as well. So it's one of those things that, He's been out in Ohio. He's been racing maybe a little less stock than these in some of these races. So this is the chance to really prove that he's the leader of this division with a win in the Breeders' Crown. And those two are set for a great battle Saturday night.
Look into some of the other divisions that are going to be on display. Who are some of the other stars? What are some of the other storylines we can look forward to?
Well, race 2 on Saturday night will go on and start off the Breeders' Crown action on that Saturday card, and it is going to be a battle there of Bella Bellini versus Atlanta. Bella Bellini has been a spectacular mare all year, mare trotters, and she for sure is probably the one to knock off. Atlanta's got a tough task, but she's a big rooting interest for me personally. I think anyone who loves this sport, Atlanta is absolutely one of the best trotters we've ever seen in the sport. But it's one of those things that she's just continually run into monsters at their peak performance when it comes to the Breeders' Crown. So she, believe it or not, despite winning basically everything in the universe, I think she's won like 35 times from her 70 lifetime starts, she does not have a Breeders' Crown. And if the hint was there in the way I'm saying all this, she is retiring at the end of this year. So this is her little farewell tour. She's down to basically this and the TVG final at the Meadowlands in a couple weeks. And this, of course, will therefore be her last chance to try to finally claim a Breeders' Crown that she so rightfully deserves.
That's great. One of the things that makes racing so enjoyable all around is rivalries. Do we have any of those to look forward to?
Yeah, we got another one in the 3-year-old filly trotters, Jiggy Jog, Joviality. They'll resume no rivalry in that division. And, there's a lot of them too, a lot of these divisions. And, I think there's a lot of divisions where limb winners are obviously going to be kind of the battle, predicted is going to be these two against one another. But nonetheless, there's also always great opportunities for upsets. The favorites don't always win. So there's definitely a lot to look forward to. But yeah, a good one rivalry to discuss would be Jiggy Jog and Joviality, and maybe even Fashion Schooner sneaking in there too. I mean, that 3-year-old filly trotting division has been pretty wide open all year. They've kind of taken turns beating up on one another. But, Joviality, I think, especially when it comes to divisional honors and even this race, has a clear advantage because she's not always been in that 3-year-old filly trotter division. She's taken on the boys several times this year and has done it very well. So I think that gives her a pretty good advantage coming into this final.
You mentioned divisional honors. Is it similar to the Breeders' Cup where, look, you don't have to win a Breeders' Cup race to win an Eclipse Award, but there's probably an 80% correlation? Is it a similar deal?
Yeah, so for us, it's the Dan Patch Awards, Eclipse Awards. Again, there's so many parallels when you look at harness racing and thoroughbred racing. Really, all the same thing. We even go to Florida, too, for the award ceremony. Ours are in early February. It's late January for the Eclipse Awards, and divisional honors on the line, of course, here at the Breeders' Crown. And, yeah, it's one of those things that, I think recency sticks in the, voters' mind. So for sure, I think how you're, racing in these races and coming out of this end of the season will have a great deal of, who wins divisional honors. But, there's of course possibilities that depending on what you've done the rest of the year, you could still win. For example, at this point, I think in terms of open pacer, as well as just horse of the year, overall horse of the year, I don't think Bulldog Hanover could really manage to lose that title in the next 2 races, even if he were to finish dead last twice. So, I mean,
It makes sense. It's a very, very, very similar again in that regard. Now, you're going to have this whole other show. It might, depending on if you're listening to this or watching on YouTube, it's either going to happen or it's already happened. There's going to be loads of tips and great information on there about the specifics. But is there one thing that leaps to your mind as we record this Wednesday morning of a horse you're going to be betting, maybe one we haven't talked about yet?
I should admit it out loud that this publicly, because I've kind of said it off the record, not public people, but it's one of those things. Last weekend, I was just so tired, just had a long week. I'll be totally honest, I didn't actually watch too many of these live as I should have on the elims. Of course, at this point, I've caught up quickly on the news and notes and, caught some replays, but admittedly, my research is far from done. There'll be plenty of work done tonight for me, as well as tomorrow afternoon. I've got blocks of time set aside from my other jobs to make sure I do my due diligence before tomorrow night's show. So not necessarily, but just some overview highlights. I do know for sure, Pete, is that there are some great betting opportunities. A Friday night is one of those things that there were some upsets in the elims. There were some heavy favorites that won in the elims, but even so, I think all 4 of those divisions are so wide open. There is anybody can win in a lot of those divisions for the 2-year-old. So that may be the best card of betting. And you know what? It's also really great betting opportunities. There's $100,000 guaranteed pick 5 pools, races 1 through 5 and 6 through 10, Friday and Saturday night. So that's 4 $100,000 guaranteed pick 5 pools. And that one in races 6 through 10 on Friday night will include all 4 of those Breeders' Crown races for the 2-year-old. So that could be one that really pays with the right prices.
Phenomenal betting opportunities from our friends at Woodbine Mohawk and the Breeders' Crown. You can hear all about it with this first over roundtable. Make sure to check that out. Subscribe to Edison's feed there as well. Does such a good job covering the sport. And we may press you. I know you're nuts now, so I won't bother you until next week. We may press you to get involved and give us some Breeders' Cup thoughts as well, because you've already tipped your hand on how closely you follow the thoroughbred side of things. Edison, fantastic having you on these airwaves, and we will see you on the roundtable.